The sky was an ominous canvas of thick, roiling clouds when Elena Hartley's phone buzzed relentlessly in her silk-lined study. The message was short, brutal, and irrevocable. Emergency. Your parents' jet has gone down near the coast. Authorities en route. Her breath caught. She dropped the phone, her fingers trembling as she clutched the mahogany desk, eyes darting to the family portrait hanging above. The smiling faces of Charles and Margaret Hartley, her parents, the titans behind a billion-dollar industrial empire. Just hours ago, they had been alive, vibrant, planning their next business summit. Now the world had turned to ash. Elena's mind spiraled as she rushed to the hospital. The news that followed was a cruel blow. No survivors. A private jet, their cherished family aircraft, engulfed in flames on a lonely cliffside. Mechanical failure, the official statement claimed. But in the undercurrent of hushed rumors swirling through the press and corporate circles, whispers of sabotage began to emerge. The Hartley family estate, normally a sanctuary nestled in sprawling gardens and ancient oak trees, felt suffocatingly empty. Elena barely registered the condolences flooding in, her body moving like a ghost as she prepared for the funeral that would mark the end of her parents' legacy and the start of a nightmare she could never have foreseen. On the day of the funeral, the grand cathedral was packed with mourners draped in black. The glittering faces of industry elites, politicians, and media vultures blended into a blur as Elena sat stiffly beside the casket, clutching a handkerchief to her lips. Marcus, her husband of 10 years, stood beside her, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus leaned in close, his voice low and chilling, cutting through the haze of grief like a razor. "I am inheriting the company. Disagree with me, and we get a divorce." The words landed with a terrifying finality. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She stared at him, disbelief freezing her. Was this some cruel joke? Marcus, the man she had trusted implicitly, who had always smiled supportively as she poured herself into philanthropic causes while he managed the family's boardroom battles, was suddenly cold, calculating, and ruthless. She was stunned, alone. The weight of betrayal pressed down harder than the grief of losing her parents. Whispers fluttered around them. Sharp, speculative glances from distant relatives. Curious stares from old family friends. The media sniffed blood, sensing scandal in the family's fracture before the first funeral wreath had wilted. Elena's mind reeled. Her parents had built their empire through sheer grit and vision. She was their only child, their legacy. How could Marcus, her husband, wield such power over the fate of everything they had built? But beneath the surface, a flicker of suspicion ignited. Why had Marcus chosen now, at the funeral, to reveal his ultimatum? Was this a long-concealed plan? And what had she unknowingly agreed to all these years ago? As the funeral guests filtered out, Elena's eyes locked on Marcus's face, searching for a trace of the man she thought she knew. But all she saw was a stranger, cold, determined, ready to claim what he wanted. Outside, dark clouds gathered, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Elena's world had shifted, irrevocably, and she knew this was only the beginning. The mansion's towering mahogany doors groaned shut behind Elena as she sat across from the family's trusted lawyer, Richard Gaines, in the dimly lit study. The air was thick, with the scent of aged leather and polished wood, a familiar setting that suddenly felt suffocating. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the heavy envelope Richard slid across the table. Inside was the last will and testament of her late father, Charles Hartley. But as Elena flipped through the pages, her heart sank deeper with each line. Her eyes caught a section recently added, dated just weeks before the crash, that named Marcus, her husband, as co-heir alongside her. Not only that, but there was a signature, eerily familiar yet strangely wrong. The smooth cursive wasn't her own. "Marcus is listed as co-heir?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Richard nodded grimly. "Yes, and that's not all. There's also a prenuptial agreement you signed shortly after your wedding, though I understand you didn't read it thoroughly." Elena's mind raced. She remembered the whirlwind of their wedding day, excitement, joy, and the eagerness to start their life together. The stack of legal papers Marcus insisted she sign felt like a blur. She had trusted him implicitly. Richard continued, "The prenup grants Marcus significant control over the company's shares in the event of your parents' passing. Combined with this revised will, it gives him sweeping power." A cold wave of betrayal crashed over Elena. Why would my parents agree to this? They knew Marcus for years. They trusted me to carry on their legacy, Richard hesitated. There are some unusual clauses. We suspect some documents may have been forged or manipulated. Elena's breath hitched. Her husband's betrayal was far worse than she imagined. She felt as if the walls of the house were closing in. "I want a full audit," she said firmly, voice steadier than she felt. "I want every document, every transaction scrutinized." Richard nodded. "I'll assemble a team discreetly. But Elena, be careful whom you trust. Marcus is very persuasive, and he has allies." That night, alone in the vast estate, Elena's thoughts spiraled. Her phone lit up. Messages from friends, business contacts, and reporters hungry for scandal. Marcus's ultimatum echoed relentlessly in her mind. Disagree, and we get a divorce. She stared at the photograph on her bedside table, her parents smiling warmly. How could Marcus twist a family legacy into a weapon against her? Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Not everything is as it seems. Look closer. He's not who you think." Her pulse quickened. The next morning, Elena began digging into the company's intricate web. The corporate empire her parents built was a fortress, complex, sprawling, and riddled with hidden passageways. She combed through shareholder agreements, contracts, and emails, searching for the cracks that might reveal Marcus's true intentions. As she pored over financial statements, she found anomalies. Transactions routed through offshore accounts, millions unaccounted for, and investments she had never authorized. Someone was siphoning money out of the company, and the paper trail led to a mysterious shell company linked to Marcus. Elena's world tilted. The man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, was orchestrating a hostile takeover from within, using deception, forged documents, and manipulation. Determined to fight back, Elena confided only in Richard and a handful of loyal staffers. But the deeper she dug, the more isolated she felt. Marcus's influence spread like poison. Friends and colleagues who once supported her now questioned her sanity and loyalty. That night, as rain lashed against the mansion's windows, Elena vowed silently, "I will not let him win. Not without a fight." The trap was set. Now she had to find a way out. The sleek, glass-walled conference room atop the Hartley Tower hummed with an electric tension as the board members filtered in. Elena arrived last, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, but the warmth she hoped for was absent. Instead, she was met with guarded glances, polite nods, and thinly veiled skepticism. Marcus stood at the head of the long, polished table, impeccably dressed and radiating calm confidence. His smile was practiced, sharp, precise, a mask hiding his ruthless ambition. He motioned for the meeting to begin. "Elena," Marcus began smoothly, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Thank you all for assembling on such short notice. As you know, the passing of Charles and Margaret Hartley leaves a void in leadership. I have been entrusted with guiding the company through this transitional period." A murmur rippled among the directors. Elena took a deep breath and rose, her voice steady but carrying the weight of both grief and defiance. "Marcus," she said, "I am the rightful heir. My parents made that clear their entire lives. I intend to carry their legacy forward. I ask you all to consider the facts, not ultimatums." Laughter bubbled from a few corners, thinly disguised. One director leaned toward another, whispering, "She's out of her depth." Marcus seized the moment. "Elena's recent behavior has been concerning. Erratic decisions, emotional outbursts. It's in the company's best interest to have stable leadership." Elena's cheeks burned. She fought to maintain composure. This was the same board that owed its allegiance to her parents, yet now they sided with Marcus, swayed by his charm and whispered promises. Marcus clicked a remote, and a screen behind him flickered to life. displaying carefully selected emails and documents portraying Elena as unstable. Messages she never sent, conversations twisted out of context. The board's eyes darted between her and the screen, uncertainty growing. "Is this true?" one influential director asked pointedly. Elena's voice hardened. "No. These are fabrications designed to discredit me." "Then prove it," Marcus challenged, his tone icy. The room grew colder. Elena felt the walls closing in, the game rigged against her. It was not just a battle for the company. It was a war on her reputation, her sanity, and her very identity. She glanced around, searching for allies, but found only polite smiles and cautious avoidance. Even Richard, her trusted lawyer, looked concerned but hesitant. Summoning every ounce of strength, Elena vowed silently, "This isn't over." As the meeting adjourned, Marcus approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Think carefully, Elena. You can fight me, but the cost will be high." Outside, the city skyline glittered under the fading sun, indifferent to the betrayal playing out in its highest towers. Elena's phone buzzed, a message from the unknown sender. "They're not on your side. Trust no one but yourself." The message felt like both a warning and a promise. Alone in her penthouse that night, Elena stared at the darkened city below. Her parents' empire was slipping through her fingers, stolen piece by piece. But beneath the fear, a fire burned. She would find a way to expose Marcus, to reclaim what was hers. No matter the cost, the boardroom coup was only the beginning. Elena sat in the dim glow of her home office, the late-night silence broken only by the soft tapping of her keyboard and the occasional crackle of the fireplace. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in her mind, dark, relentless, and unpredictable. After the boardroom humiliation, she knew she needed allies she could trust, but trusted few remained. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from James, a former executive who had been fiercely loyal to her father. Years ago, James had left the company under mysterious circumstances, but Elena had never forgotten his discreet kindness. Now, in this desperate hour, he was her last hope. "Meet me at the old warehouse. Midnight. Come alone." Despite a knot of unease, Elena knew she had no choice. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, a forgotten relic from the company's early days. Shadows clung to the rusted metal walls as Elena's car rolled to a stop. James was already waiting, his face etched with worry and determination. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, pulling a worn briefcase from his coat. "What did you find?" Elena asked, heart pounding. James opened the case, revealing a stack of files, financial records, and a USB drive. "I dug through the company's offshore transactions, stuff Marcus would never want you to see. These are account records linked to shell companies, funneling millions away from Hartley Industries." Elena's eyes widened. "But who's behind it?" James glanced around nervously. "There's one shell company, Lawrence Capital, that keeps popping up. It's registered in the Cayman Islands, but the real owner is masked. Whoever controls Lawrence has been siphoning funds for years." She swallowed hard. "Marcus?" James nodded grimly. "Everything points to him. But there's more. A few key employees vanished recently, people who might have uncovered this too close to the truth." Elena's breath hitched. "Do you think they were eliminated?" "It's possible." James's voice dropped. "Marcus's reach runs deep. Be careful, Elena." Before she could respond, the warehouse door creaked open. Both froze. A shadowy figure slipped inside. A courier. He handed James an envelope, nodded once, then disappeared into the night. James opened it. Inside was a single photo. A man in a dark suit standing beside the CEO of a rival firm, Marcus's known competitor. The photo was time-stamped just days ago. "Looks like Marcus's web extends beyond Hartley Industries," James murmured. "This could be the key to exposing him." Elena felt a surge of hope, mixed with dread. The man in the photo was someone powerful and dangerous. As she prepared to leave, James grabbed her arm. "Elena, promise me you'll watch your back. Marcus won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens him." She nodded, steeling herself. "I won't let him win." Back in her estate, Elena plugged the USB into her laptop and began combing through the data. Each transaction, each code name, painted a picture of a carefully orchestrated betrayal, a ghost account moving millions under Marcus's control, draining the company's lifeblood while he smiled publicly as its savior. But then, a chilling realization hit her. This betrayal wasn't just financial. Someone close to her was feeding Marcus information. Every step she took, every move she made was anticipated. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the anonymous sender. They're watching. Trust no one. Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart racing. She was not just fighting for an inheritance. She was fighting for her life. The rain hammered relentlessly against the windows of Elena's study, blurring the city lights into streaks of red and gold. The storm outside was fierce, but the tempest roiling inside her was even more violent. A single phone call from an unknown number had shattered whatever fragile sense of control she'd managed to maintain. "Look closer at the crash," the voice had whispered, before cutting off. Elena sat frozen, the weight of those words settling deep into her bones. Mechanical failure? It had been the official cause, but the nagging doubts planted weeks ago had grown roots and branches. She couldn't ignore the possibility that the crash was no accident. Determined, she called in a favor from an old friend, Detective Marcus Alvarez, a seasoned investigator who owed her father a favor and had kept an eye on the case unofficially. Within hours, Alvarez arrived at the estate, rain still dripping from his trench coat, his eyes sharp and skeptical. "Elena," he said gravely, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports. Something doesn't add up." He spread out the documents on the heavy oak table: maintenance logs, pilot schedules, and black box data. The pilot was replaced at the last minute, Alvarez pointed out. The original pilot had a spotless record, but this replacement had ties to a firm Marcus Hartley once invested in, one that's been under federal investigation. Elena's heart pounded. "You think Marcus had something to do with this?" Alvarez didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but there's enough to warrant a deeper look. Someone tampered with the plane's maintenance records, and the black box data was incomplete, possibly deleted." A chill ran down Elena's spine. She pictured her parents, trapped in that doomed flight, victims of a cruel betrayal. "We have to find out who stood to gain," she said, voice trembling. "Marcus is the obvious suspect," Alvarez nodded, "but you're playing a dangerous game. If Marcus orchestrated this, he's powerful and ruthless." That night, Elena scoured the company's archives and her parents' personal files. Hidden among routine correspondence, she found cryptic emails between Marcus and unknown contacts, referencing cleaning up and removing obstacles. The language was veiled, but the intent was clear. Her phone buzzed again, a text from the anonymous source. "He's already watching you. Trust no one." The paranoia gnawed at her. Who could she trust? Friends, family, even some employees seemed to drift away, their loyalties shifting as Marcus tightened his grip. Then came the unthinkable, a break-in at her estate. Nothing was stolen, but her private files were rifled through. Elena realized the threat was no longer just corporate. It was personal. Determined not to be cowed, she arranged a meeting with a forensic aviation expert overseas via video call. The expert confirmed signs of deliberate sabotage, critical components replaced with faulty parts, evidence scrubbed from digital records. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus, driven by greed and hunger for power, had orchestrated her parents' deaths to seize control of the company. But why stop there? Was Elena next? Late into the night, Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror, haunted by the question. How many lies had Marcus woven around her? How deep did the conspiracy run? Her phone chimed again. This time, a photo. Marcus shaking hands with a shadowy figure known in criminal circles, dated just days before the crash. Elena's resolve hardened. She wouldn't just fight for her inheritance. She would uncover the full truth and bring those responsible to justice, no matter the cost. But as thunder crashed outside, she knew one thing for certain. In this deadly game, the next move could be her last. Elena woke to a pounding headache and the cold bite of dread creeping through her veins. Her phone screen glowed with dozens of unread messages, some sympathetic, but many filled with cruel whispers and veiled accusations. Her name was splashed across headlines and social media feeds. Heiress unravels. Mental health scandal rocks Hartley empire. Is Elena Hartley fit to lead? She slammed the phone down, trying to block out the growing storm of doubt and suspicion. But the real blow was yet to come. Her doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. When she opened the door, a man in a crisp suit was waiting. Dr. Lawrence Caldwell, a psychiatrist known in elite circles for his discretion and influence. Elena's heart sank. This was the man Marcus had quietly brought in years ago under the guise of marriage counseling. "I'm here to discuss your evaluation," Dr. Caldwell said smoothly, holding a thick folder in one hand. Elena's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen Caldwell in years, but now his return felt like the tightening of a noose. Inside the mansion's grand sitting room, Caldwell laid out his report. A meticulously detailed document diagnosing Elena with emotional instability, mood swings, and what he labeled a progressive detachment from reality. "Your behavior," Caldwell said, "poses a risk not only to yourself but to the company's stability. I recommend you be relieved of all decision-making responsibilities." Elena's hands trembled. This was weaponized psychiatry, an expertly crafted document designed to strip her of power and paint her as unfit, all on Marcus's orders. When the report leaked to the press, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Media outlets dissected every past action of Elena's, twisting normal grief and stress into proof of a mental collapse. Board members who once hesitated to side with Marcus now used Caldwell's report to justify sidelining Elena entirely. Meetings were held behind closed doors, and Elena found herself locked out of key discussions. Even her closest confidants wavered, unsure whether to stand by her or protect their own positions. Lonely and vilified, Elena questioned her own sanity for the first time. The carefully orchestrated attacks on her mind unsettled her deeply. But beneath the doubt burned a fierce determination. Elena reached out to Dr. Miriam Sanders, a respected independent psychiatrist with a reputation for uncovering the truth behind fabricated diagnoses. Miriam agreed to review Caldwell's report, and more importantly, to evaluate Elena herself. The evaluation was grueling. Miriam's questions cut to the bone, demanding honesty and self-reflection. Yet, for the first time in weeks, Elena felt understood, seen beyond the public spectacle. Miriam's conclusion was clear. Elena was a victim of gaslighting and manipulation, her diagnosis a cruel fabrication intended to destroy her credibility. Armed with this new report, Elena planned her next move. But the cost of resistance was steep. Marcus's allies were everywhere, and the board was preparing a formal motion to remove her from all leadership roles. One evening, as Elena pored over legal documents and psychiatric assessments, her phone vibrated with a message from the anonymous source. "They're closing in. Trust no one." The mansion felt colder than ever. Elena's fight was no longer just about inheritance or justice. It was a battle for her mind, her identity, and her very existence. In that moment, staring into the flickering fireplace, Elena vowed to expose the lies and reclaim her place, not only as the heir of the Hartley empire, but as a woman who refused to be broken. The heavy scent of old paper filled Elena's fingers as she rifled through the neglected drawers of her father's study. It was late, past midnight, and the mansion was cloaked in shadows, broken only by the faint moonlight spilling through the tall windows. Her mind was a storm of doubts and fears, but tonight she was searching for answers. Something buried in her parents' past might be the key to unlocking the deadly puzzle Marcus had woven around her. Her fingers brushed against a worn, leather-bound journal, tucked beneath stacks of business files. It was her mother's personal diary. Elena's breath hitched as she opened it, the delicate pages crackling softly. As she read, a hidden chapter of her mother's life unfolded, secrets kept behind closed doors, carefully shielded from the public eye. The most startling revelation was a clause her father had quietly slipped into his final will, hidden from everyone except a trusted few. If the direct heir, the child of Charles and Margaret Hartley, was declared mentally unfit or unable to lead, control of the family empire wouldn't pass to a spouse or partner. Instead, it would transfer to a sibling. But Elena was an only child. or so she had always believed. Her mother's diary hinted otherwise. There was mention of a young girl, born out of a secret relationship in the early days of Charles and Margaret's marriage. The child had been given up for adoption, shielded from the harsh spotlight of the Hartley name to protect the family's reputation. Elena's hands trembled. A sister? A sibling she had never known? The realization cut through her like a blade. She needed to know the truth. The diary contained a name, Isabel. Determined, Elena called Richard Gaines, the family lawyer, and shared what she had found. Richard's voice was cautious but encouraging. This could be the key to reclaiming your inheritance. If a sibling exists, the will might favor them over Marcus's claim. Elena felt a spark of hope, but the path ahead was uncertain and dangerous. Could she find this sister? Would she be willing to help? And could they trust each other in a battle shadowed by betrayal and greed? In the following days, Elena immersed herself in the search. Public records, adoption agencies, and old contacts all were pulled together like puzzle pieces. Every lead seemed to hit a wall, every name a dead end. Until a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a retired nurse who had cared for Margaret years ago. She mentioned a child given up for adoption, the nurse said hesitantly. She believed the girl was strong-willed, independent. I think her name was Isabel. Elena's heart pounded. She had to find Isabel. When the address was finally located, Elena hesitated outside a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, worlds away from the marble halls she was used to. She took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly to reveal a woman with fierce, intelligent eyes and a guarded expression. Isabel. Their eyes met, and in that instant, a complicated web of emotions, curiosity, suspicion, hope passed between them. Isabel was wary. She had built a life far from the shadows of the Hartley empire. When Elena revealed her identity and the stakes at hand, Isabel's defenses rose. I don't want anything to do with that world, she said coldly. I don't want their money. And I certainly don't want to be part of their drama. But Elena knew Isabel held the power to shift the balance in the battle against Marcus. As they parted that night, Elena felt both hope and uncertainty. The sister she never knew existed was real, and the family's secrets ran deeper than she could have imagined. The game had changed. Elena couldn't stop thinking about Isabel. There was a fire in her sister's eyes, fierce, defiant, and untrusting. Elena saw her own stubbornness mirrored back, but it was coated in something harder. Isabel had been forged by a life of independence, raised without the privilege or protection of the Hartley name. Now that same name had returned to haunt her. For days after their first meeting, Isabel refused to answer Elena's calls. Her texts went unread. Elena didn't blame her. She was a stranger dropping bombs about long-lost bloodlines, billion-dollar inheritances, and a corporate war laced with danger. But Elena didn't have the luxury of time. Marcus was moving faster than ever. The media frenzy over her mental health had yet to die down, and Marcus had used the distraction to secure a private shareholder vote aimed at pushing Elena out of the company completely. She needed Isabel, not just for the legal loophole in the will, but as the only person left who could claim the Hartley legacy with her. So she did what her parents had always taught her: go straight to the source. Elena returned to Isabel's apartment unannounced. This time, she came not with legal documents or stories of sabotage, but with photos. Childhood pictures of herself, of their mother Margaret, handwritten notes from their mother's diary. Evidence not just of blood, but of truth. Isabel stood in the doorway, silent, as Elena laid them out on the worn kitchen table. Her jaw clenched, but her hands hovered over one photo, a younger Margaret in a garden, holding a baby that wasn't Elena. She never looked for me, Isabel whispered, her voice cracking. She just erased me. She didn't, Elena said softly. She just made a mistake. And then she tried to fix it the only way she could, by protecting both of us. There was a long, painful pause. Then, finally, Isabel asked, "And what do you want from me?" "Not your loyalty, just your truth," Elena said. And maybe a chance, for both of us, to stop Marcus before he ruins everything. Isabel exhaled slowly, nodding once. All right, but if we do this, I want to know everything. No more secrets. What Elena didn't expect was how quickly Marcus would react. 2 days later, Isabel's car was broken into. Her laptop and phone were taken. Then, a threatening note was slipped under her apartment door. Stay out of what doesn't belong to you. That was the moment everything shifted. Isabel marched into Elena's penthouse with a storm behind her eyes. He sent someone, she said, voice sharp, to scare me. Elena felt her pulse spike. Are you okay? I'm not scared of men in suits or shadows in alleys. But I am in, Elena. Let's burn this bastard to the ground. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not in fear, but in power. She was no longer alone. Together, they began planning. Richard, the lawyer, confirmed that with Isabel's cooperation, the clause in the will could be activated, legally disqualifying Elena and placing Isabel at the head of the company. But they weren't just going to fight this in court, they were going to expose Marcus. Publicly. Irrevocably. Elena stared at the city skyline that night with Isabel beside her. 2 women, 2 daughters, cut from the same bloodline, ready to reclaim what was stolen. In the war for the Hartley Empire, the tide had finally turned. The plan was simple in theory. Dangerous in practice. Elena and Isabel knew Marcus wouldn't fall through legal traps or moral arguments. He had built his life on staying one step ahead. The only way to bring him down was to bait him into exposing himself. They decided to turn one of his greatest strengths against him, his arrogance. For weeks, Isabel posed as a reluctant partner, attending shareholder meetings and social events where Marcus flaunted his power. She let him believe she could be bought, played the long-lost sister who wanted nothing more than a payout and an escape. Elena, meanwhile, continued her role as the erratic heiress, spiraling under pressure. Together they crafted a performance so convincing it fooled even the closest insiders. The key was Marcus's aide, Evan Merritt, a junior executive who had always lingered in Marcus's shadow, eager to please but clearly undervalued. Elena remembered Evan from boardroom briefings, a nervous energy, constantly scribbling notes, always looking over his shoulder. Richard, their lawyer, suspected Evan was handling some of the more covert financial activities for Marcus. If they could get to Evan, they could trace everything. Elena approached him privately under the guise of a breakdown. I can't do this anymore, she said, voice cracking with carefully practiced desperation. He's tearing everything apart. If you help me, I'll make sure you're protected. At first, Evan hesitated, but the guilt had already been eating away at him. He didn't know everything, but he knew enough. Offshore transfers, paper trails altered, corporate money diverted into political donations and silent buyouts of Hartley competitors. When Elena showed him the forged documents bearing her signature, the same ones Marcus had used to seize power, Evan cracked. With Evan's cooperation, Elena and Isabel began constructing a digital map of Marcus's corruption. Shell companies, backdoor deals, falsified contracts, and worse, communications linking Marcus to a private aviation contractor suspected of tampering with aircraft mechanics. The final move was risky. They leaked carefully selected information to Marcus through Evan, framing Isabel as a threat, planning to take full control of the company, using insider support. They knew Marcus wouldn't wait. He was too strategic to risk losing power, too paranoid not to act. And he did. A week later, Marcus made a quiet offer to Isabel through a fake intermediary, $10 million in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and formally surrendering her inheritance claim. What he didn't know was that the intermediary was wired. The meeting took place in a private wine cellar beneath an upscale restaurant Marcus often used for discreet business. Isabel played her role perfectly, hesitant, anxious, just greedy enough to be believable. I just want out, she whispered, eyes darting. I don't want a war. Marcus leaned back, smug. Then you're smarter than your sister. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside, a contract that not only invalidated Isabel's rights, but also included clauses acknowledging payments made from company funds, a paper trail, a confession. The moment the meeting ended, Marcus stepped out into flashing lights. Federal agents, hidden cameras, a live warrant. The footage was streamed to Elena's encrypted laptop in real time. As she watched Marcus's expression shift from confusion to rage, a tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, but release. The empire her parents built had nearly crumbled under Marcus's greed, but the trap had snapped shut, and Elena had pulled the wire. The Hartley Tower rose like a steel monument to ambition, but on this day, its sleek, mirrored facade reflected a reckoning decades in the making. Inside the shareholder auditorium, the atmosphere was electric, charged with curiosity, suspicion, and the lingering scent of scandal. Executives, journalists, and board members filled every seat, murmuring about the sudden emergency meeting called by Marcus Hartley. On the surface, he appeared untouchable, confident in his bespoke suit, flanked by high-powered attorneys and PR specialists. He was prepared to announce his permanent role as CEO. Elena had other plans. Moments before the meeting began, she stood in the corridor outside the main doors, breathing steadily. Isabel stood beside her, sharp in a tailored black dress, her expression unreadable but unshakable. "You sure you want to go in together?" Elena asked, her voice low. Isabel smirked. "Let's give them a show." Inside, Marcus took the podium with a polished smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your presence today. We're turning a page in this company's long and respected history. In the wake of tragedy, we've stabilized, refocused, and the auditorium doors swung open." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Elena and Isabel stepped in, flanked by two attorneys and Richard Gaines. The press cameras, already poised for coverage, turned like hunting dogs, shutters snapping. Marcus's voice faltered. Elena walked to the front with poise, her heels echoing against the marble like war drums. "I'd like the floor," she said coolly. "This is a closed meeting," Marcus snapped. "Actually," Richard interjected, raising a court order. "Per emergency shareholder protocol, Ms. Hartley is entitled to address the board. And this," he pointed to Isabel, "is Isabel Hartley. Legal heir under the succession clause you conveniently tried to bury." Marcus went pale. The cameras caught every flicker of his reaction. Elena wasted no time. She cued the presentation. On the massive screen behind her, slides began to play, wire transfers from company accounts to offshore holdings, falsified invoices, altered maintenance records. Then, grainy footage from the sting, Marcus sliding the contract across the wine cellar table, saying, "Then you're smarter than your sister." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts. The boardroom cracked like ice under pressure. Some executives stood. One vomited. Another demanded Marcus be removed immediately. A booming voice silenced the room. It was a federal agent, stepping onto the floor. "Marcus Hartley, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Marcus turned to run. Flashbulbs popped as security grabbed him. Cameras captured his final moments as a free man, shouting wild accusations, sweat streaking his perfect hair, eyes darting as the empire he tried to steal crumbled beneath him. And Elena? She just watched. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. Later that evening, Elena and Isabel sat on the balcony of the estate, their mother once filled with laughter and piano music. Below them, the Hartley vineyard stretched out into the night, bathed in moonlight. "Now what?" Isabel asked quietly. Elena sighed. "Now we rebuild. Not just the company. Us. This family." Isabel nodded. "Then let's start by getting rid of that god-awful portrait of Marcus in the lobby." They laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. The war was over, but the future was unwritten. Elena Hartley wasn't just the heiress anymore. She was the survivor, the truth-teller, and the architect of a new legacy. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone.